Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So China is once again playing Trump like a cheap fiddle. The headline news is that Trump is threatening 100% tariffs on China. Yeah, we've heard that before, haven't we? And this has caused the biggest hit to the financial market since April. We've also heard that before, which is funny because this is exactly the same thing as happened with Trump in April, isn't it? Trump is so hopelessly out of his depth that he's trying the same thing which forced him to, what was that technical term Wall Street investors came up with? Oh yes, forced him to chicken out. And he's so clueless that he thinks the best way to respond to China this time is by doing exactly what caused him embarrassing failure last time. We can probably do without this just when major banks and even tech giants are talking of an AI bubble bursting. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So, although the headlines are on Trump once again threatening cartoonish levels of tariffs and the hit to the markets it predictably caused, what triggered the orange moron into a repeat of his already failed strategy? Well, there are expected to be direct talks between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in the next few weeks, although Trump has now cast doubt on that, specifically to hammer out a trade deal. Although Trump reversed almost all of his ill-advised tariffs against China a few months ago, the situation with them never really resolved. The US and China sort of agreed to something, but there was no firm trade agreement, not a lot of public information about what was agreed at the time, and it was just left hanging. So these talks are expected to allow the two huge markets to come to some sort of accord, which will hopefully bring a bit of stability back to world trade. So, inevitably, as these two economic adversaries are getting ready for those talks, each side is going to try and leverage its strength to maximum effect. Of course it is. Or they would be if both sides were led by people who knew what they were doing. But China knows two things to its advantage. The first is that Trump is a moron who understands nothing about trade, but also refuses to consult with experts who do know about trade and could compensate for his buffoonery. The second is that China has almost complete control of the world's supply of processed rare earth minerals, which the US is utterly dependent upon. So China has leveraged both of these advantages. They opened up a monopoly investigation into US tech firm Qualcomm, as well as announcing a squeeze on the export of rare earth minerals. But, and this is what's important, those export restrictions are not intended to come into effect until December. Basically, China is saying they're going to restrict access to rare earth minerals for US companies, including for military purposes, a few weeks after the talks between the US and China. In other words, China is saying, look, this is on the table, give us something in return for dropping those export restrictions. But of course, Trump doesn't want to give anything. Of course not. No one would want to concede more than they have to. So he counters with a restriction of his own in an attempt to play a game of tit for tat, which in theory is sound strategy. Where it falls down is that Trump has threatened something which China knows is empty. This tariff escalation has already played out earlier this year. That brief but explosive trade war will have done a lot of damage to both the US and China. However, China knows it can take the pain for longer. It was the US which backed down. It was Trump who chickened out. You know, he was assailed by drops in the markets and the bosses of Walmart and Target telling him their shelves were going to be empty of those cheap goods, which are crucial for MAGA supporters within a matter of weeks. So he folded like a cheap deck chair. Wall Street investors then came up with a term to describe the phenomenon of Trump acting tough on the world stage, only to back down when the world barked back. TACO, or Trump always chickens out. The orange one did not appreciate this acronym. Actually, to be fair, you could argue the acronym is a little invalid, given that the S&P 500 did crash here, because Trump hasn't applied these tariffs, he's only threatened them, right? So why did the market crash if they're convinced he'll just chicken out? I'm not sure they're all that convinced, you know. But anyway, never mind. China, on the other hand, I'm sure there were plenty of tense meetings there, because this, you know, the trade war will have hurt China as well. But there was no flap or panic evident in public there, was there? I mean, China will have taken a hit, just like the USA. But there are a few things which protected them from the pain a bit better. The first is China has spent the best part of a decade actively diversifying its trade away from dependence on the United States to prepare specifically for such a trade war. They've been planning for this. America hasn't. The second is that China doesn't produce independent economic figures, so they can massage the data to make it look better than it really is. The third is that they are a dictatorship effectively, so the usual democratic norms are much weaker. It's not that they don't exist at all. Any government has to make sure it doesn't push its people too far, but China's got way more scope than America has. Something Trump is trying to address, but he's not there yet. And the thing about tariffs, as we certainly know now if we didn't before, they do hurt both sides. Sometimes you get away with limited tariffs as a way to temporarily shield a vulnerable industry from foreign competition. Even that has its risks, but the universal nature of Trump's tariffs is just damaging to trade both ways. And China's already proven it can take more damage than the United States before it squeals. So when Trump threatens these 100% tariffs, you can bet the Chinese will be pissing themselves laughing. It proves to them that Trump is out of his depth. Because if he knew what he was doing, his counter threat to rare earth exports would be more logical. So what would be more logical? Well, in a tit-for-tat trade war, any measure you apply hurts you as well. There is no risk-free measure in a trade war. But if it hurts your opponent more than you, it can still work. Because the end goal is in a trade war is supposed to be that you reduce those trade restrictions you apply. You're only applying them temporarily. It's a bit like in a real war. You know, you don't want the guns to be firing forever, right? It's just until you gain some advantage. For example, China threatening to restrict exports of rare earths. It's a delayed threat. Why? Because they don't really want to do it. But if they do go ahead, they know it will hurt the United States more than them. The hit to China is reduced sales. No point pretending that won't hurt against a rare earth hungry market like the USA. But the United States adds a lot of value to those minerals, creating extremely valuable chips which go to advanced computers, cutting edge military technology. So China takes a bit of a hit economically, but the US takes a much bigger hit to not only their economy, but their military power as well. And because those chips are sold all around the world, it makes the US an unreliable supplier if the restrictions last for a long time. Last time, Ford had to stop production of its cars. The impact would be far wider this time. So to counter it, Trump needs something which, yes, is going to be a hit to the US as well, but a bigger hit to China's. We know that raising tariffs doesn't do that because they've already demonstrated that China can take the pain for longer. And nothing has happened which has made China more vulnerable or the United States more resilient over the summer. So by threatening the cartoon tariffs, Trump has basically told China he hasn't got any ammo left in this trade war. And if Trump didn't have anything real to fire back with, he'd have been better not responding at all, leaving it to his negotiating team to sort it out. If Trump had any brains, he'd have realised China is just using the threat as a bargaining chip because the measure is delayed until after the talks, and he'd have just remained calm, sanguine. Someone have asked him about it, he said, they're just playing larks. But he didn't. He reacted in a way which damaged his own economy by spooking investors again, and maybe even emboldening China to get even tougher with their already strong hand. And all this, as experts are worried that the AI bubble burst is more a case of when, not if, and that when could be quite soon. Can do without this. And there's another consequence to all this as well. As America weakens its links around the world, China is, of course, strengthening its own. If it becomes the dominant force in world trade, as is their plan, of course, Europe will remain the only bastion of anything even attempting ethical trade, as China and Trump's America encourage others to take part in a race to the bottom. And that's assuming Europe is even able to hold out in such isolation. The signs so far have not been good. I do hope people in America realise that even if Trump and his MAGA cult are removed from power in the not too distant future, which is a big if in itself, there will be no recovering from the damage of this malevolent moron. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.